Hello, everyone. Hi there. Welcome to our webinar around creating content more sustainably in 2022, but also beyond. We'll give it a couple of minutes. So I've got a few people coming in. In the meantime, I'll introduce you to who we are. So my name's Charlotte. I head up our client service and marketing team here at Powerhouse. And we have James, who heads up our creative and our innovation in the studio side. So to give you, for anyone who doesn't know, Powerhouse hasn't worked with us before, we're a creative content production company based up in Leeds. We work a lot on creating content in volume, creating high quality content at scale, and that's what we'll sort of tap into a lot when we look at the efficiencies of production throughout how you can be more sustainable in how you go about getting content. So let's kick off. I'll give you a few sort of initial pointers just around housekeeping. So we have obviously the session running for around 40-45 minutes. We'll have time at the end for any questions that you might have. And following that, obviously, if you do have any questions, we have a chat function that should be sitting along the bottom. Simply type away in there and we'll see your questions coming through and we'll be able to answer those for you at the end. So I will pass over to you, James.
Hello, everybody. So I thought it would be naive of us to talk about sustainability and production without talking first about greenwashing. It kind of it's been a very common and prevalent thing in the market at the moment, in the misunderstanding and the misleading of data towards how we are going to be more compliant with with production in general, but also with the promotion of sustainability. As an industry, we always want to be at the forefront of opportunities, technologies, and concepts, but this haste can lead to a misunderstanding of the data and the trivializing of this approach in order to just quickly get an answer out there. So what we're bringing to the forefront is to say that we don't actually have all the answers. What we do have is a process and a pipeline built on a changeable algorithm or a changeable factor that is driven by industry standard. So what we're doing is taking the area that we know best and adding our knowledge and our expertise to this wider problem. It's the impact of production for us, but it's the impact of production in isolation. So we're going to work closely with industry data sources, production companies, agencies, and brands to adapt and evolve our approach and our commitment to this process as we go on. Everything that we talk about in this presentation is based on the foundations of a pipeline and a process that we expect to evolve over time, all the time. And we're building everything so that all the input that we can do from a production point of view, from an innovation point of view, from a strategy point of view, has third-party companies weighing into it, including yourselves, brands, agencies, and other production companies that we're working with, all need to weigh into understanding this end-to-end process. We can't solve the climate crisis in isolation, and I wouldn't even dream to suggest that any impact that any single brand or single company or single thought leader is going to solve that problem. It's a factor for us to all solve, and so I'd like to put that right up front and just say that the answer is not just what we're coming up with. The answer is a sustained approach to solving this together. But why are we solving this together? Well, it's a matter of factors, but let's not kid ourselves. Every webinar I've ever been on, every meeting that I've ever been in for the past 2 years has to mention COVID at somewhere. But it's the COVID behavioral change of people that has led to some of this. It's certainly been a massively huge contributory factor in why we are now looking at this so seriously and so deeply. It's Blake's value action gap that has really allowed us to really action the change here. It's kind of the holy grail of how we overcome barriers, both as a society and as an industry. But the action gap is that an individual can do nothing, one company can do nothing. It's when it gets to that point where action is in everybody's interest that it becomes a thing. The same way the way that COVID and vaccination and all the rest of it, it had to be a cumulative process. But that kind of adaptation to behavioral change is still very in the forefront of everybody's mind, which means that this is coming in with much more passion and much more vigor. Again, there's other areas like the severe weather conditions over the last 4 years where we've seen, serious problems year on year on year. COP26. And actually, from a brand perspective, sustainable brands actually top in some of the FTSE 100 indexes and things like that, like Tesla and stuff, where they're actually completely sustainable, and that message is actually adding value to the company itself. So that's kind of a selfish reason, but it is a contributory factor. So for brands and consumers, it's still, as we say, it's still massively on the forefront of their mind. And in a survey, you'd expect these figures to be high, but people say they want to live a sustainable life. But I'd say 16% of them, we found that 16% of them really are not actively doing it. So it's part of the wider team, the wider initiative to drive this forward and to kind of support and help people, bring them along without actually forcing them to change their habits too much. And of course, this habit change has influenced how people look at products, the origins of products, way more than they did back in pre-pandemic times. And that shift actually is also part of how our employees, our staff, and our internal community has been affected. The interesting side effect of like the Great Resignation is the movement over post-COVID has seen climate and sustainability actions become massive drivers in corporate hiring and employee retention schemes. Obviously, everybody's going to say that they want the impact of the planet to be at the forefront of the brand or the corporate environment. But it's nice to see that is filtering through both to hiring practices and benefit packages and all the rest of that stuff that typically a ping pong table may have been sufficient now, but before. But now it's far more a green policy and an approach to being more sustainable and more climate friendly. So for all of this, it's all about an end-to-end knowledge. Get your house in order first, get our house in order, get your house, your brand, and start with what you can have significant impacts and significant change. For us, we will be working with Ad Net Zero and Ad Green as our calculator, which are two of the industry standard ones for advertising and production sustainability initiatives. The Ad Green was only launched in September, but the base level algorithm of how we input the data, how we interpret that data, and how we invite brands, agencies, suppliers, anybody else to fulfill their elements within each one of those projects all adds to looking and getting an end-to-end understanding of each segment of each production, of each campaign, and of each product. This is a slightly higher approach, but this is looking at what the brand or the business can do in general, either through offices, travel, all the rest of that sort of stuff. But we are looking specifically at what we can do as a brand and agency, and what you can do. I won't read through some of these, but these are basically very similar. In a production, we have a different set, but it's very similar in how we approach sustainability. And one of the factors that brands and agencies are going to have to be very compliant with over the next year, certainly over the next 3 years, will be their commitment to working in a sustainable way, their commitment to understanding the pipeline that is outside of their control. So there's, as much as we need to be compliant with the stuff that's outside of our control, it will be a factor of your briefing and your approach that will be looking at the sustainability and the capability of us as suppliers, of media buyers, of product suppliers and manufacturing processes all across the board, that all will link to learning that end-to-end journey. And some of these factors are in here, but realistically, this is to start your journey. So this is why we're all doing it, but this is also how we can all understand each other within that domain. One thing's for sure, though, content's not going to stop being a necessity, and certainly marketing's not going to stop being a necessity, whether this is driven by climate demand or not. It's going to be how we mitigate and how we use our skill sets to innovate our way around this, because people are still going to need visual content, and we're still going to need to feed that digital beast constantly. It's never going to stop for us, and it's never going to stop for consumers. So how we get around that and how we work more efficiently and more collaboratively is how we're going to make the largest impacts on sustainable production and lowering emissions. Things like, I won't go into this too much detail because I do talk about it a lot, but if we're talking about an omni-channel approach and looking at our content planning and content strategies, we're not actually creating content for TV or just for digital or just for out of home anymore. Campaign development is across the board, and therefore by bringing that into the forefront of production and the agency at the same time, not just on one campaign, but over the entire year, what are the business goals from a brand development, a seasonality point of view, and brand salience point of view, all driving that need for us to get insight and oversight and an understanding of those applications and those demands at the same time as the agency, at the same time as the brand, so that we can help with our production strategy to help limit the number of shoots we do, limit the number of reasons for us to travel, reasons for us to get props, and reasons for us to build things. So actually considering that all at the same time has more value from a cost saving point of view than it does from a climate saving point of view, but they both work in tandem. So the more that we can do in one go, the cheaper it is, the more effective the content is, the more assets we can achieve, the more integrated approach and continuity standard for anything that we do. But the side effect of that is bringing down the emissions, because it's we're not doing it all in separate instances. I think about the mess middle of how we actually create content and that consumer funnel. It's just not the same anymore. It's just not 6 steps down to purchase or conversion anymore. It's a sustained approach of hitting people when they're at that moment of need. So the content is all over the place, and it's always going to be a very, very always on digital approach. So we're kind of looking at production in the same sort of way, where we're looking at batched continual production rather than single campaigns or single projects anymore. If we can do that, we're in a much better position to have the greatest impact on the environment and in emissions. Right, where we create.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do was obviously share with you that sort of context and background as to how we've come up with these solutions for you, but really give you some ideas that can tap into where we're creating content, how we're creating it, and what we're actually creating, so that you can take these away alongside data that we've collected from our project internally, so our own clients' data, to really give you some food for thought in how you go about producing content going forward. So first of all, looking at where we create, so we have locations, and studio being one of them, the environment in which we're actually creating the content itself. So these are the standard emission outputs from a UK production, be it in studio or on location. Typically, the majority of that carbon output is through the travel and the actual environment in which you're shooting itself. Now, as you can see, the difference between the two, when you're shooting on location, you're actually using like 3 times more, you're giving off 3 times more the emissions of what you would be doing in studio. And that just looks at a location, for example, in the UK. If you're going to be traveling abroad, that becomes even more substantial. So this output just looks at the travel component alone. So when you actually get to your location, that yellow bit is the whole production wrapped up. So this just really highlights the difference between where we can ideally shooting in studio. We've got some ideas of how about we can do that. Because of the output the location gives. Now, that's not to say that we can never shoot on location. We shoot on location. We work with a lot of food and drink companies that shoot on location, because you want to be showing everything about your brand and your farms and your fields and where all your produce is coming from in the first place. Well, what we are saying is there's probably a better way of doing location than what we're doing right now. So the first thing being localized crews. So as I said at the beginning, we're based in Leeds. We do shoot in different locations across the UK. And what I would suggest that we do at the minute with shoots work on is we have people from our in-house team who can kind of be that powerhouse brand guardian, that person make sure you're getting the powerhouse quality at every touch point. But we would hybridize that with sort of localized crews. So we would go out and work with crews that were based nearer that location so that we're really avoiding the impact of travel. Because travel, as we can see, is the next biggest factor outside of the actual environment that we're going to be in. Another thing as well is carbon offsetting. So CAP and Ag Green have calculators whereby anything that's the stuff that you have to do that's unavoidable, you can actually pay a fee for that and get that offset afterwards after the production. So that's a way in which you can offset the work that's going into the production on location there. Also, combining location shoots, if we're going to be traveling to a bar or a restaurant or a farm, then is there more content that we can get in out of that? Can we shoot 3 projects in one and know that we're going to be distributing those later down the line so that you're not having to multiply and duplicate the amount of travel that you are doing to the different locations and the sort of environment that you're using within that time. And the final thing as well for locations is actually in visual effects. So we're talking a lot about actually shooting linear footage here, but there's things like shooting with green screen, shooting virtual production, which we'll come on to in a sec, and really being smart about what you're shooting versus what you're buying in terms of stock. So let's say we need a drone shot that's over a city. There are so many of those that already exist. Why put more carbon into the environment by trying to shoot that again from scratch? Those are the things where we can be a bit smarter in integrating those into the wider production. So that's when we're looking at the location side of things. There's obviously the studio element. So we have a quite sizable studio here. For anybody who's not been before, we have about 7 studios within this one building. And therefore we get through a lot of content and a lot of productions. And something we've done is actually a bit of a deeper dive into the projects that we have been doing over the last year and pick out, okay, so where are our clients saving the most money and where are our clients acting most sustainably? And we can then share that back with you. So we've taken a data sample of around about 250 projects, and these date back from last November to this November. So they're really recent, very relevant. And we looked at those from a point of view of sets, of props, and of ingredients. In terms of sets, we have clients that will come and build a set each time that they need a project. And we have some that have one set and they'll amortize that out across a longer period of time. The clients that do build one set and they modify it and use that across a longer period without having to build it again from scratch, on average save about £150,000. Now, this is coming straight out of your content budget. So this is money that you want to spend in actually what the output is that you're going to be getting and not the environment that we're shooting in. So from a financial point of view, but actually when it comes to carbon, they're also saving 11.56 tons of carbon emissions. Now, what that equates to is like 2 cars operating for a full year. And that is across the year in which your production happens. So that's the saving that we're talking about in that regard. And when it comes to props, what we found is over that year, we have done around 77 prop sourcing trips. This is for props that don't live in this building, that are sourced completely from scratch for the individual projects that need to happen. And again, we have some clients that will source it for each job. We have some clients who will invest in a bank of props and they'll use that across a longer period of time as well. So on average, for each of our jobs, the props spend was coming in at around £360 per job. And that's on top of all that travel that you're already doing and the carbon that's coming off from that point of view and the money that it's going to cost. But for our clients that did invest in one prop bank and use that across a year, we found that actually, instead of doing 2 sourcing trips per project, it was more like 1 sourcing trip per 4 projects. And when purchasing props, it went from being £360 a job to £67 a job. So actually, you're making quite a lot of saving there. And that was an example of where clients have shot with us each week, or we've had like 44 projects within the 1 year. And that's how we've worked all that out. But ultimately, by having that prop bank in-house and the set in-house, it means that you're keeping all your content in one place. You're not doing as much travel. It's easier from a briefing point of view as much as it is a budget point of view. But those are the kinds of savings that you can be making by having all those things in. Now, when it comes to shooting, again, I know I touched on virtual production earlier on. So go into this in a little bit more detail. For anybody who doesn't shoot virtual at the minute, what this is it's capturing everything in camera. Unlike green screen, it has the environment in which you want to be shooting actually in the background, be it as small as a screen or a wall. But what that does is it means that you have a location or a context or a kitchen or a set or anything, whatever you need, rather than building it. It can feature as a virtual background instead. What this does is it not only saves money in terms of the set build side of things and then the carbon that comes off the back of that, but it gives you a lot more creative possibilities. So you're not needing to travel to different countries for one project because you want to show the origins of every product within a new range. It means that you can have these different interchangeable backgrounds. You can make it really personal to your audience and to the area and demographic you wanted to reach, but you're not having to travel to multiple places and you're not having to build things. And it's a much better, more efficient way of working when it comes to working sustainably in content, particularly. But it means as well, actually, you can achieve creative that you didn't think possible before. So that's one way in which you can look at approaching sort of the context of where you're shooting to become more sustainable. Now, with virtual, there's obviously virtual tech that has come into the folds, particularly since COVID. And something that we do have set up here is live shoot attendance. Now, this is virtual. It instantly reduces your carbon from 2.7 down to 2 per shoot, and that's on the average of basis of travel being reduced. We suggest this, and this is great for sustainability. We also love seeing you. We love you being on set, and there's nothing really that compares to having you here. So it's about how can we make that more efficient? How can we group projects together so that you're having to do less travel? How can we create environments here where you can work and treat this as an extension of your own space so you're not having to travel up and down the country in order to shoot with us and be on set? So really it's down to the planning and the production element to make sure that we are grouping this content together and you're only having to travel once, but ultimately this can be an extension of your space that you work with. And it works both ways. It means as well, if we're grouping more together, then we have to travel less, and therefore you're saving on that element too, with that being the second highest output from a typical project.
So what are we creating? Well, every time that we approach a project these days, to be honest, we used to do this anyway before. It used to call it creative consultancy, but actually there is a sustainability message in there as well. It was originally developed, change the brief, hashtag change the brief, get in there. It was originally developed by Mindshare, and it was alongside the AdGreen and net zero policies. And it was basically a promise that any brief that came through the door, any idea that came either through production, creative agency, PR agency, anyone, we would look at manipulating and changing the creative approach of any one of those briefs to a more sustainable solution and pitch that alongside the scope for the original brief. Typically, we do that anyway because we're looking at a more efficient way of doing production or a more value add way of doing production, but it absolutely works for sustainability as well. And actually working further down that line, we can kind of apply our specialisms in food and beverage to look at that as well, not just knowing how we shoot a piece of content, but knowing how we can tweak a brief to manipulate some of the impact that food itself has on sustainability and creative production, marketing production for stuff like that. Like things like beef being incredibly difficult from a carbon offsetting point of view to handle, whereas a vegan or vegetarian solution may be far easier for us to control. Therefore, by using a creative manipulation of a brief or something like that, we can adapt what we shoot and what we commit to shoot for our end client, either through agencies or brands or anyone, and actually start to change the message at the very core of it, which slowly will filter through to consumer intent. But I think change of brief is a fantastic policy for anyone, both agency, PR agency, production company, production partner, anyone like that, for us to be able to talk collaboratively about how we work together on creative whether it's for sustainability purposes, whether it's for efficiency, whether it's for just creating cool stuff. I think it's a great mandate that we are sitting at the heart of how we work from now on. Also, reusing and recreating. Again, I talk about this quite a lot, but actually considering all of the creative branching and the creative roots right at the beginning of a shoot, and shooting almost ancillary products around reusing those assets. The less we have to shoot, the smaller the production window, the less emissions we're going to kick out. The more we can reuse content, the more we can create that bank of usable assets, the less we're going to impact on the environment, but still tell that story that we need to tell. So I'm not saying we don't need it. I'm saying that the way that we approach capturing it should be more holistic around the visual that we need at the time. This is very popular anyway in the industry, slightly larger than just production. Like John Lewis offering £1 million to initiatives that will help people not throw products away and reuse, recycle, and resell the stuff that they have. Apple recently offering to open the doors of how to do screen replace rather than having their products be locked down to a replace culture. And indeed, IKEA creating series where they're now talking about how to disassemble the furniture that you've spent 300 hours assembling to either resell or move when you move home. This idea of reusing and recreating something, upcycling something from what you've already got. There's tons of practical examples for that, both stock and owned assets. But for us, it's about knowing and having access to some of those assets, whether that is brands creating digital asset libraries, us building digital asset libraries for brands, or agencies having access to all of these areas that we can pull from right at the beginning of a project, so we don't have to look at that afterwards or find it afterwards or shoot the bits that we don't need to. How we create things.
How? So this is about the planning. Planning's been a tricky word this last year because we haven't been able to do much of it. But going forward, hopefully these ideas will help feed the plans that we do have coming out of COVID. So we focused on food here because a lot of what we shoot is food and drink content. Whilst we can influence a great deal sort of the food before it gets to production in terms of content production, that's really for you guys to be looking at. We can really look at what we do with that food here and how we act sustainably and efficiently with that to help save you money and help save the carbon impact. So we get through 20,000 pounds of food a year. That is just the extra ingredients. That's not even samples. That is just the little bits here and there, the garnishes, the sides that we're shopping for throughout the year. We have a weekly shop of about £400. We do 8 trips a week on average for just the food briefs that we have. Obviously, we work in different areas as well. But that just gives you a bit of a picture as to the amount of food that comes in and out of this building. And that's sort of in addition to the samples that we're shooting as well and the products that we are shooting. Really what we've learned from the data over this last year is actually, yep, the bigger projects, chances are they're going to need more food. Like, that's a bit obvious. There's no sort of shock there. But actually, just because you have a bigger project doesn't necessarily you need more shops and you need more travel there and you need more of an impact in that way. We've had projects that are around 20 grand that have been sort of one shop and we've kind of covered all bases with that. We've also had jobs that have been more like 5 grand. We've done 10 shops. So the correlation is mad. There is no science in that you actually need more shops and more of an output just because your project's bigger. You don't. And the other thing that we found from the data is actually it tends to be these projects in the middle that are probably the more reactive ones that are spending a lot more when it comes to everything, ingredients, props, sourcing, set. These are the ones that kind of like the circa 10, 20K mark. They're not the one-day shoots where you kind of have those planned and they're quite efficient and quick to turn around and relatively cheap to turn around. And they're not the big sort of strategic projects that have all that planning and insight going into it. It's these ones in the middle where we need to just make sure that we are still planning for those to be able to sort of reduce your overall impact when it comes to sustainability on shoots. And yeah, there is a direct correlation between actually that planning element and actually when we're not planning for those shoots, how significantly higher all those other elements are, right through from props and ingredients, the full suite. So a way in which we can look to do that planning, obviously it's easy for me to just sit here and say, oh, we need to do more planning, when it's like, okay, well, I've got really little time. I really don't know what's happening in the environment. How do we even begin to look into this? So a few practical ways in which we can help here. We host a content calendar that comes out every year. We'll be having our 2022 one come out imminently. And this will help give you markers along the year whereby you can group projects together, know about them in advance, and it means that you can get those in a much shorter production window and work in production windows and blocks rather than reactive project by project on a weekly basis. That feeds into Hero Hub Hygiene. Now, this is a model in which you create content. So your hero being your key seasonal campaigns, your hub is kind of if we're looking at a food element, the human interaction with food and the human emotion and involvement when you have people involved. The hygiene is your everyday daily content that goes out, and that's more product focused and just really increasing that brand awareness that people will have of you then. How we block these out is in those production windows. So rather than shooting reactively each month, it's looking at a whole year of content and seeing how can we be more efficient here. Typically, we found working on that model, clients are saving about 30% of their overall annual content budget, but we would work with clients on a bespoke basis to look at how we can group stuff that's going to be right for them. Because not everything can be planned, and it's about how we can fit in those moments of reactivity. We can just reduce them down a bit more. And scoping out opportunities as well. This is where, when given a project, a bit like James mentioned with looking at challenging that brief, we will see, are there more opportunities from this content? If we're going to be putting this production together and you're going to be spending your money and we're going to be having the impact that has on the environment, then how can we be smarter with that time? Will we capture content for multiple opportunities and branch those out? And it means we get it in one shoot window rather than having to sort of shoot reactively then going on later down the line. Multi-rigs is another thing. If you haven't already been doing this, this is key for really reducing down the amount of people on set, the amount of travel that's needed, and also reducing down the budget so you're not having to pay for everybody every day. It's how our studio set up, it's how other production studios might set theirs up, but we have the capacity to be able to shoot between 2 and 4 rigs per room. And that means that we can have people sort of move between the different sets. So you don't have to have everybody duplicated 4 times over. You can have people that have shared roles across those and dual roles across those rigs, which means that you're really reducing down the amount of bodies in the room. It reduces down your need for travel because you're here for physically less time. It's great for quick deadlines and tight turnarounds because you're actually shooting in half the time, but it really does have an impact when it comes to the sustainability of your project. And the last thing we have is around animation. So we've talked a lot about shooting, and this looks more at the digital side. This omits the need for a crew altogether when it comes to shooting, because actually what you'll have is your food, you're quite restricted in how many different ways you can package up a product. The packaging would typically be the same, and it's actually the visual and what it looks like that's different. If we can move away from having to shoot all that from scratch, not only is that going to be more sustainable because you don't have that need for crew, but actually it's going to be more cheaper in those areas as well. We can get to a point where actually no people are working on it and you just have an oversee. So when it gets to certain volumes, let's say we have a can and you need that to look visually different for new products, rather than sort of buy in those multi-packs every single time and you're doing the trips, you're doing the spend on the actual materials themselves, and that's where your budget's going. Invest that actually into an automated process whereby we can automatically change those from a digital point of view rather than having to shoot everything every time. And that's something to consider with particularly your e-com as well. If you have a large volume need where actually what the crux of it is pretty similar, then we look to create that in a virtual environment in animation.
What are we doing just to kind of round it off at the end? But I don't know whether you remember back that the initial graph, certainly the UK studio graph, a good 25-30% of it was the studio itself, and that's one of the first points for us is getting our house in order and starting to look at the scope as it applies to us. This isn't a self-serving thing, but it's something how quickly we've managed to solve some of these problems, or at least measure and calculate some of these issues and build a plan to start to mitigate the impact of these. And actually, for us, it's been a great opportunity for us to, I mean, you can see there, the ones that we've ticked off straight away. From a business point of view, our utilities are now 100% recyclable, both gas and electric. The supplier that we have is 100% recyclable. Our loo roll is completely recyclable. Our journey of inbound and outbound paper and cardboard waste is 100% recyclable. We only source recyclable materials now for set builds, that's MDF and softwood and things like that. Anytime we do have to build something, we can build it and take it apart in a way that allows us to either reuse it or recycle it or give it away. We've given a lot to theatre companies, apparently. I'm reading this from a list, but that's what we've been doing. We're launching an out-of-office policy in the next couple of weeks, which will be designed to imminently reduce significantly reduce the electrical equipment usage that we have both in the office and in production, either by switching it directly to sleep mode, or actually just completely turning it off, but using a little bit of automation to do that rather than relying on employee engagement. And because we're a food and bev company, we can't not talk about food and bev. A lot, as Charlotte mentioned, a lot of our work is with food, and therefore a lot of the takes are with food. Therefore, the better we get with understanding what that shot needs to be, the less takes we need to use. Therefore, the less versions of that product we need, and therefore the less waste in that. But we are inevitably always going to have unusable product or wasted product. So how we deal with that product is very, very important, whether it's how it's distributed internally and how it's distributed by charity as well, and how it's disposed of. So now our food waste is separate to both the recycling and the general waste in itself. It is collected on a weekly basis, but also pushed straight through to a composting site for the renewable energy I mentioned earlier. And that kind of policy really for us is one of the major impact factors. We've just gone through an audit in September, October with Rebiz, and we will be doing that again in 6 months to reevaluate every core component of this building itself, but up and down the stream of where we get involved with content, food and bev particularly. The next 12 months, all of our lighting will be LED compliant with both sources and remote switches, motion switches. 24 months, we will have fugitive emissions under control. That's air conditioning and refrigeration. Obviously, we have a lot of fridges. In the next 12 months, we will be completely paperless with all of our production. It's not as big as you think it is, but actually getting us to there and getting clients to get on board with how we get there is quite a step change. There's a lot of people that do love a brief on a piece of paper, and how we push that message rather than just saying no, how we play the game to make sure that they're getting what they need and we're getting what we need to do the job, but in a more sustainable way is the trick. And lastly, one of the biggest things for us is having a nice garden. We go through a hell of a lot of herbs and spices and all sorts of stuff. And when you go to a lovely restaurant and they say all our products are locally sourced, our goal in the next 6 months is to have a lovely herb garden that we can pull a lot of the herbs and the dressing and the finishing touches to a lot of the work that we do pulled from 10 feet outside of the building. It's a huge policy for us, but it's also something where we can control the quality of that product as well. So it's a really great thing. And and somebody mentioned we're having a wild bug and bee garden and a hotel. So that's great as well.
And that's the thing. These are the things that, I mean, yeah, really by working with us, that's the promise from us of what we're going to stick to from our side. But something that we'll be doing with clients as well, like we have in interpreting all that data from the past year, is work more interactive and collaborate with clients in terms of how can we help you specifically reduce the carbon impact of your projects. That's something that in client services we're really keen to do as well. with all of our clients is not just show an example of what works for a client in particular, but actually let's look at your content calendar. Let's look at where you want to be as a business with your own sustainability promise and see how we can help do that with content.
Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much, Eco Warriors. Any questions?
That was everything from us. If you do have any questions, please post them in the chat function. Obviously, there's also our details that we'll send across to you. You'll get a recording of this session afterwards, so that will land in your inbox as well as our details. So any questions that you do have around anything that we've talked about today or mentioned that you want to find out a bit more about, or how that can apply to your projects, then do get in touch.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Have a great day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.